Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webcast, How AI is Transforming Retail Customer Acquisition Strategies, brought to you by Drift. I'm Rachel Brownell, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides and other goodies by clicking on the Attachments button below the presentation window. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our help guide by clicking on the Help link in the Rate This box. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during this webcast. Just type your question into the Ask a Question text box below the video window, and then click the Ask a Question button. At this time, we recommend. Before we jump in here, I'm going to start a live poll. And audience, this question goes to you. It'll show up below the presentation window. Feel free to vote by clicking on the correct button. So the question is your company already using chatbots? Your choices are, yes, we use them for most customer outreach. Yes, but we only use them some of the time. No, but we'd like to. And no, we have no idea where to begin. And before we jump in, I'd like to make an introductions. Again, discussing today's topic are Rob Roy, Chief Digital Officer with Sprint, Eugene Fagan, SEO Manager with Sears Parts Direct, and Jaimy Szymanski, Industry Analyst and Founding Partner of Kaleido Insights. Jaimy, over to you.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome to all of our attendees. We have a really lively discussion ahead of us today that will cover how AI, machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, computer vision, all of those tangential and connected technologies, how leading retailers are utilizing them to acquire, reach, and engage their consumers. But before we settle into our discussion, I'd love to go around the virtual room here and have each panelist briefly introduce themselves, and I'll do the same, to provide some context for our AI conversation. So Eugene, let's kick it off with you.
Sure. So I am Eugene Fagan. I'm as they mentioned, the SEO Manager for Parts Direct. I've been in the SEO industry for roughly, I would say, over a decade at this point. And so, yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Eugene. And Rob?
Hi, Rob Roy, head up the digital ecosystem for Sprint. It includes AI, includes digital marketing, and all things omni as it scales across our company.
All right, great. Thanks, Rob. That's good background. And I'm Jaimy Szymanski, Industry Analyst and Founding Partner of Kaleido Insights. Kaleido Insights is a research and analysis firm where we focus on the impacts of disruptive technologies like AI on consumers, businesses, and ecosystems. So today's webinar topic really fits squarely in the middle of two exciting upcoming reports that we're currently working on at Kaleido. One is on how companies can ready themselves for AI, which I'll touch on those pillars a bit later, and another on how organizations are utilizing AI and automation to impact the customer experience along every step of the journey, which is also incredibly relevant to a lot of retailers. Now, to kick things off, I'd like to take a little time to set the stage for all of our attendees and take an eagle-eye view of AI and how it applies to retail. So let's begin with a broad definition of AI to level set. At Kaleido Insights, we define AI as an umbrella term for the variety of tools and methods used to mimic cognitive or brain functions across three key areas. The first area is perception and vision. Now, this is where technologies like computer vision and facial recognition come into play in order to make sense of all of that visual data. The second bucket is speech and language. Here, you'll be familiar with terms like natural language processing, or NLP, that make sense of the big data of conversations and customer support. And finally, learning and analysis. This includes machine learning, deep learning, and all of those savvy algorithms that help make sense of the troves of data within organizations. And remember, when we're discussing AI today, that multiple technologies within each of these use cases and these functions can be utilized at the same time because the machine's ability to cognate or to think is really supported by multiple approaches. So some of the AI applications in retail might take advantage of both learning and analysis algorithms as well as computer vision and perception. So let's take a closer look now at some of these use cases and how they apply to retail. As you can imagine, AI really takes on a life of its own when confronted with the myriad of consumer and internal data sources that make up the retail ecosystem. Some of the more common AI applications in retail that you might be familiar with are on your screen, and these include everything from multivariate testing and web optimization. So this is like A/B testing but on steroids, or it's like A through Z testing, when machine learning algorithms learn what works best on site or often in e-commerce environments and applications over time, and they automatically optimize it for best consumer experience. We'll also talk a little bit more about chatbots. I know we had that poll in the beginning that I'll turn to Rachel a little bit later on in our discussion to talk about how you all are using chatbots today. And we've all interacted with a chatbot or two, I'm sure, that utilizes NLP or cognition to guide us to the right action or resolution. Even things like biometric payment. You know, we've all used our fingerprint to pay for things on our phone, and that utilizes AI to verify who you are and what you say is correct. Facial recognition, a lot of interesting experiments and pilots being done in facial recognition right now in retail, including things like, using in-store cameras with computer vision to enable AR, augmented reality experiences in fitting rooms, to using those same cameras to recognize customer sentiment while they're walking around your store and what path they're taking to purchase. And that can really impact things like staffing or even digital signage. Another popular one that we're seeing right now emerge in retail is visual search. This is where customers can search items in the real world or in store using their phone's camera. And then they can find those products for purchase online or add to their registries in and out of store. And there are many more use cases. I mean, this is just a short list of some of what we're seeing emerge the most at Kaleido. I could geek out on these all day, but we've got to move on, and I'm sure that we'll cover a lot of these applications in our discussion momentarily. But first, I want to bring these applications to life in terms of personalization, because all of these AI use cases have one thing in common, and that is that they contribute to greater customer acquisition in retail. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So I wanted to share this chart with you all to put AI in this perspective of personalization, because that seems to be the lion's share of AI usage today in retail, using machine learning to contribute to these more relevant, more personalized shopper experiences. And now this chart comes from a recent Deloitte study that surveyed 500 traditional retail, pure play, consumer goods, and branded manufacturing leaders around the globe and how they use AI to make CX more personal. And as you can see, the biggest AI bets are in pricing and promotion, search, and personalized content. And I wanted to give a little bit more context to this data to show you that adoption can still be quite low across the board. So just because we see that these are the top use cases, it's important to know that on average, just over 1/3 of brand leaders have even adopted AI for any of these given use cases. And there's also investments that are increasing right now in employment, with brands planning to employ 50% more data scientists over the next 3 years. And this brings us then to our next slide when we take a look at retail experimentation in this space. And it shows in this timeline right here that AI is really still in its infancy among a lot of retailers as they experiment with potential applications. And looking at this timeline, this makes our conversation in today's webinar so very valuable, because you'll get to hear from leading retailers who are actually implementing AI. And this timeline comes from Kaleido Insights. You can see that it showcases how many retailers are discussing AI in earnings calls, because that's typically an indicator of their resource allocation and their vision, as well as this top-down executive commitment to AI. And it's not super surprising to see this, that, we've seen a lot more of an uptick in the past year of talking about AI on these earnings calls. But in the meantime, that doesn't mean that experimentation isn't happening. Our research at Kaleido Insights on AI readiness and CX automation has uncovered that companies typically start with experimentation in one line of business or a specific use case, and they work bottom up, because top down, is important for support, but really these proofs of concept allow for quick learning and failing fast and proving the results needed before involving multiple decision makers and data sets throughout the organization. And now that our context has been set for the discussion, let's get into our questions for our panelists. And let's begin with the how behind AI strategy. So with all of the potential use cases out there, we went through this laundry list of AI applications. How exactly can retailers begin to determine what is the best use case for their business? Rob, let's kick it off with you.
Sure. Definitely not the first softball question. I think for each business, I think first you have to determine how much you really want to get into it, because AI and ML can really become this onion where you're peeling back layers and layers and layers. And so I think for me, the first thing that we thought about was, did we want to focus on the back office, or do we want to focus on the front customer experience areas? And I think determining where you want to go from there is going to help you determine the path you take on whether you build it yourself. As to your point, do you bring in a whole bunch of PhDs in the data science field and start to really create your own algorithms, or do you buy something out of the box? I think that first question, though, is do you want a front-facing AI and ML opportunity, or are you looking at back office for cost savings and efficiency?
Those are great points. It's hard, you got to connect it to those initial business goals, and you have to see if those are customer facing or internal facing. I'd agree with that. Eugene, could you weigh in?
Sure. I mean, for us, I think Rob made some good points on there. I mean, I personally think it's a lot of times best to test some stuff on the front end, do small experiments just to see how it plays out. We typically like to use a third-party vendor instead of building something out. We usually try to use someone else first, see how it works out, see how much investment is in there, because technically we don't need to build our own technology then. We can use a third party for that, and then once we see the benefits and all the potential, then we look at, well, how do we then now build our own using our own data scientists and onboarding all the individuals that we need to execute on this. That's front-facing as well as on the back end. Hopefully that was
in terms of how you're utilizing AI in particular, I know that you're the SEO manager for Sears Part Direct. So are you using it in SEO only, or some other multivariate testing on site, or how did you land on that use case?
So we typically, we're trying to get to it. We honestly haven't executed on it as much yet, but honestly, it's more of the social team that tries to work on the AI stuff right now, just because it's a little bit easier from they just handling, like you mentioned, some of the chatbot stuff and stuff like that potentially can work into it. So I kind of work with the social team pretty closely, so that's why there's a little bit of a connection there. But that's the extent that we have been playing around with.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for delivering that context too. And if I could ask the same appendage question to you, Rob, in terms of how did you land on your initial use cases for AI at Sprint, and what were those?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first attraction for us was probably too short-sighted. We actually looked at it from a cost savings perspective and how we could augment some of our cost to serve as we started building our back end. And so we decided to actually build our infrastructure and partner with a few key outside strategists and smarter people than us, but all the core infrastructure we're building on-prem. And as we started to build it and see how the potential of it was, we started to expand our use cases to really affect both the back end and the front end, looking for ways to be more efficient, to spot potential hazards or issues or opportunities much quicker, and then also as a way to enhance the lives of our employees. And so we went from thinking about it as a cost savings tool to a training enhancement tool to a customer or to a sales rep assist tool, and everything in between. And so we've kind of been excited to expand the use cases, but the first real opportunity for us was building the right foundation, and that took a while. But building the first right foundation gives you the leverage and opportunity to expand in a much quicker manner.
Great. I think that's great advice from both of you in terms of how to get started and determine those initial best use cases. Now, before we get to the next question, Rachel, I would love if you could close out the poll and read those responses back to us, because chatbots are definitely an opportunity area for AI in retail, and I would love to see the results of that poll.
Absolutely. So again, audience, thank you for your responses. The main question was, is your company already using chatbots? And the majority of folks answered that yes, but we only use them some of the time. The next most popular answer was no, but we'd like to. And then a fair percentage of you said that no, and we have no idea where to start. So back over to you, Jaimy. Are any of those answers kind of surprising to you?
I think it's interesting to hear that, Rachel, especially the top answer there. It sort of jives with some of the other studies and actually, VentureBeat webinars that we've put on with you that show that people are really using chatbots right now in a retail environment for only part of the customer experience, right? So you wouldn't want someone to, be frustrated with customer service and a chatbot keeps redirecting them to a chatbot, right? At some point, they're probably going to want a live service agent. So that's typically where we're seeing, AI and chatbots and conversational commerce really take off, is these specific use cases and these workflows that really bring a customer through a specific journey to a specific resolution, and then at some point, they're obviously redirected to a live agent if necessary. So it's interesting to hear that, because I think that chatbots are definitely a big opportunity area that we're seeing a lot of initial adoption in experimentation, but they're one of many opportunity areas, which brings us to our second question here. I know that we've talked a little bit so far today, Rob and Eugene, about how you each are utilizing AI within your organizations, but what are some of the other really big opportunity areas that are on your radar or that you're seeing as best practices that are emerging in the space of AI in retail? Let's start with this one with you, Eugene.
Sure. I'll have to think about it, but some of the things, I am coming from an SEO perspective. It's really trying to figure out how do we modify the information you're seeing on a page or in a shopping experience based on your previous behavior. I think that's really huge for us. I think there's some really interesting insights that we could use, because essentially for me, what Google does is they cater your experience when you search for something. They cater that experience based on your browsing history, where you are, all these different nodes of information. But then once they get to our site, it's almost like they're starting from scratch. And so it would be nice, and we want to think about how do we now, because we have that information, how do we get that information and utilize it efficiently to make sure that once you land on that page, make sure that's the right product you're looking for, and make sure we're serving up all the other pieces of information that we know would resonate with you to make you execute. So that's something that I'm kind of looking into. And in the previous question, you talked about examples with, AI and stuff and chatbots. Just a kind of fun example is, the other day I was taking a lift and I had a problem. And I went into the application and I said, I have a problem. And in the past, there was always someone would text me and ask me questions, and it would be back and forth, and I would get really annoyed at how long it would take. But now it's automatically, a bot automatically asks me a bunch of options. I pick the option and automatically fixes the problem, which is pretty fascinating for me that I don't have a poor experience. They save money by not having additional employees to manage, the communication, and it all goes really smoothly.
It's interesting. I think both that example, with problems that you had encountered that was easily solved from Lyft, as well as, you talking a little bit about your experience in, trying to create this frictionless customer experience from Google to when they come on site to look at a product of yours. So I think that's definitely the theme there, is to try to use AI to create, these points within the customer journey that all mesh seamlessly and really takes the omni-channel to the next level and creating the seamless and frictionless customer experience.
Yeah, because at the same time, it costs us money, right? Every single time someone has to pick up their phone. But at the same time, a customer doesn't want to sometimes pick up the phone. Sometimes they just want the problem solved in whatever device that they're in. And we need to figure out a way to do that. And at the same time, it saves us money in the long run.
Absolutely. Rob, let's hand it over to you. What are some of the biggest opportunity areas that you're seeing to enhance customer acquisition or marketing or retention or engagement or whatever's on your mind?
Yeah, I think you could spend probably a couple hour webinar just on this one question, because it depends on the route you want to take. I do love the Lyft example. I'd take it one step further. If created correctly, you would actually know ahead of time, before the customer makes a contact, that there was an issue, and you proactively reach out to explain to them that we've noticed an issue and we're working on it. I think that's that next level intelligence that is really starting to circulate itself out there, which is kind of fascinating. I take a slightly different approach to the question and talk about how AI or machine learning can actually enhance your sales force. So your question on customer acquisition and marketing strategy is really about how do you take the best and brightest minds within your organization and get their knowledge out to the masses. Certainly if you look at a performance marketing culture, there's going to be folks that really know how to sell and really know how to acquire customers, have really excellent ideas around their marketing strategies. Look, the machine needs a baseline of information. If you provide it bad information, then it's going to output bad information. And so working with your best to teach the machines how to be better, how to learn, how to solve customers' questions, how to attract customers in a better way. You can then take that information and use the bots to create better training modules for new hires, for ongoing training, for enhancing and making a representative assist. When we look at it, we're looking at models around what we call shoulder-to-shoulder selling. So some of our reps have iPads out on the floor, and they can stand side by side with customers and sell to them new cell phones. What we can use from a machine learning perspective is, over time, as we find new combinations of how our reps work through the system, we can actually change the flows to reflect the best case scenario for converting a customer. We can also learn from those movements on where we need to remove things, or in real time, if we see certain insights or attributes that are pinging, we can make adjustments to the system. As an example, if we start to see more people loading in on a certain phone or a certain price plan, we can elevate those to the front of the experience so that our reps don't have to go looking for it. Or if someone in North Carolina has struck on something that's working really, really well, it can automatically upload into somebody's machine in California. And so I think there's a really interesting and deeper opportunity when it comes to AI and ML from a employee assist model. And so we've been pretty focused on that to help our team become more proficient and give them the tools that they need to sell.
Wow, those are some great examples, Rob, of these internal opportunities that you're right, that they ultimately impact customer conversion, but there really is more back of house. And it's interesting because in this report that I'm working on with my colleague, Jessica Grootman, who focuses on AI and automation at Kaleido, we found that people and roles training and involving frontline employees and sales staff is just as important as ensuring that you have the right, training sets for your data. That people are a very important pillar because ultimately they contribute to a greater customer experience. And I think that you made a great point too in terms of these constantly evolving data sets, that by no means should AI be treated as a set it and forget it initiative. That it learns over time, and that you have to keep feeding it, the right data and tweaking it as needed, because otherwise you follow that old adage of garbage in, garbage out. So you have to really pay attention to the cleanliness of your data and using it in the right training sets too. So a lot of good points there. Thank you both. We've talked a lot about opportunities at this point, as well as what you're doing today and what's working and some of the best practices. But let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about some challenges. So what are the top challenges? And these could be that either of you have encountered, personally with trying to deploy AI initiatives, or some of the top challenges you've seen with other retailers across the board, or even your personal experiences. I'll give you a break here, Rob, since you just gave a great long answer there, and we'll hit it back to you, Eugene. If you could talk about some challenges that you've encountered along the way.
Sure. Sure. So a lot of the information that we produce on our site has to go through legal. It has to go through review, because we could potentially hurt a customer. These are customers that are purchasing a piece of equipment from us to replace or fix another piece of equipment. And if we give them bad advice, we could potentially have issues. So a chatbot is great in a lot of concepts, but at the same time, we have to be very, very cautious. If we accidentally give them the wrong advice or something happens, that's where we have to be concerned. So that's like one of the hindrances with AI, is that, it can be fantastic for answering just general questions, but when things get really more detailed or more granular, you need kind of an escape to get to a live person in a certain situation, because every situation for us is a little bit more unique. I'm sure AI could learn with time, but there's also a liability that potentially comes with AI that we're always concerned about.
Interesting. So you need that escape hatch to get to a live agent.
Yeah.
It's still
once in a while.
Not quite perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Because and that's the thing that's going to happen also with anybody that's in the banking industry that wants to maybe automate. Let's say you want to call Chase and you want to have a bot that answers all your questions. But there might be things that like I have sometimes problems answering a bot with my personal information because I don't know where that information is going. Or do I trust a bot more than I trust a human? I don't know. That's another question that I would probably consider.
Yeah, that's a great point with, AI being looked at as a black box in a lot of ways for not only, internal data strategists and marketers that are trying to use these tools and need to trust them and their recommendations, but to your point, also to consumers. That if you're wary about giving your information to a chatbot, there has to be that disclosure up front in terms of how the information is being used and to what extent, and if AI is running it. There's a great example from North Face. I'm not sure if you have seen, or if any of the attendees out there, where you can create a custom apparel based on their artificial intelligence algorithms running in the background, and you can do that online, but it tells you up front, hey, this is what's happening, this is what your data is being used for, and this is with the machine learning that's at work in the background. So I think transparency is going to be a key to overcoming that challenge. Rob, let's go over to you. What are some of the top challenges that you've encountered or you've seen other retailers encounter in deploying AI?
Yeah, sure. So this may be too simplistic of an answer, and you guys are looking for a little longer form. But for 45% of our audience who say that they would like to or have no idea where to start, I would say do not be a sprinter. This is a marathon, and what you can't do is commit to starting a program and the very next quarter reap massive rewards from it. This is very much a slow and steady wins the race. That's why a few slides back you saw a bunch of different retailers dabbling in very different ideations of what AI and machine learning means to them. It takes time, and it takes a just immense magnitude of data and training of the system to start to reap some of those rewards. And so those first 6 to 9, maybe even 12 months are really used building, teaching, creating, enhancing. Take chat for an example. To have the bot become super efficient at even just 1 or 2 use cases, they're going to need to read through and understand 200,000+ chats. Just a very simple example of someone saying hello, teaching the bot hello, hi, how you doing, what's up, how's it going, all these different variations of what our brain doesn't even think about or react to, you have to teach. And so it's really about kind of birthing the baby, getting it through its toddler phase and watching it start to walk and then run. And if you don't take that approach to it, you'll be very disappointed with the performance.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, especially as you said, you see that a lot of people they don't know where to start, and that's definitely good to remember, that you can't expect it to be a fix-all for everything right away either, that it's going to take work and training and experimentation in order to get the results that you want to see here.
And you probably also need to make sure. Sorry, I was just going to say, some of the stuff that we're doing to make sure that we're ready for AI stuff is really making sure that our information is properly marked up. From a website perspective, we want to make sure that everything is there's schema markup that we use essentially on the site to make sure that the bots and AI and all this technology can understand that an image is an image. This text is about this text, all this stuff. And on the back end, we need to have also the descriptors to make sure that when we do execute, that the bot understands what it's looking at. So that's pretty important, is making sure all your data is properly organized and cleaned up for you to actually go into anything with AI, I think.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that, and really, you're getting into a little bit of my next question for both of you as well. You read my mind here, Rob, and that's about what it takes internally to prepare. So I'll give you both a chance to think on your answers here. I'll probably start it off with you, Rob, in a bit here, and you can elaborate maybe on some of the data preparedness that you just talked about. But first, I would like to share some foundation with a new framework that is in the works right now at Kaleido Insights for our report on AI readiness and how companies are preparing internally for artificial intelligence. So now this is a sneak peek that you're all getting online. We identified 6 pillars of AI readiness that companies have to address in order to be successful in their implementations. So why don't I briefly review them here, and then we'll kick it back to Rob and Eugene to talk a little bit about what they think it takes to get ready internally for AI. So the first pillar we've identified is strategy. And this has to do with AI-driven transformation, not just digital transformation, but how does digital transformation lead to AI transformation? And this begins with that ground-up problem solving that I discussed earlier, aligning your goals with your existing business objectives and your data strategy. Because if you don't have a pain, if you don't have a need for AI, there's no point, right? So you need to make sure you connect it directly to your existing objectives. The second pillar is people, because preparing people for AI and helping them understand how these solutions connect directly to their KPIs and to their goals, that is just as important as preparing data. So you need to get people on board in every facet of the organization because they likely have data to contribute to AI models, which brings us to the third pillar, and that's data preparedness. And I mentioned this earlier, it's not linear. Preparing your data is not, you do it once and you're done. But it requires managing ongoing evolution of your data pipelines, because without good data, you don't have good AI. The fourth pillar brings us to infrastructure readiness. Now, this is when we talk about software, hardware, and firmware, and that should align with your core product strategy. It needs to account for all of the rapidly evolving design configurations and ensure that you have your IT back of house ready for AI. The fifth pillar comes around to ethics. Now, this mass automation of big data and AI, they really call for this new business competency, which is formalizing your grounded approach to ethics. So what does AI mean to your organization's culture, and how do you ethically implement some of these solutions? And I think this is a really big topic of conversation that we've seen emerge in a lot of our research that hasn't been discussed a lot yet. And finally, brings us to governance, which governance connects directly to strategy and to people in a lot of these data silos, because strong governance structures, systems, and collaboration are really essential to catalyze this fluid organization that AI both requires and enables additional fluidity. Now we'll get back to this initial question that I posed both of you. And we'll start with you, Rob, because you were beginning to talk a little bit about this data pillar of readiness, but I'll reframe it for both of you just so you remember, and that is, what does it take internally for retailers to prepare for customer-facing AI? Rob?
Yeah, I think so. I think that to prepare internally, the first part I think is just getting all of the data into a place, whether it's the right place or not. I think that's going to evolve itself over time, but into a place. And I would start with the sales data, the web analytics data, your chat information if you can pull it, and if you can get it, your call center data as well. Starting there and making sure that you have the right pipes to extract that information so that you can start making decisions, start creating algorithms is going to be the best way to begin. It also takes the longest, unless you're shored up. I mean, for us, we were a legacy company with a lot of different variations of databases that needed to all be placed together so that we were talking kind of one language in one format. And so that took the most time for us. But that time was well spent as we now have pipes out to all various efforts that are working with AI. The second piece that we focused on was actually the governance, and we have kind of what we call an AI command center, and that's a matrixed organization from both back office representation, so think about people in HR or finance, and people that are touch logistics, to people that touch marketing, and of course web enablement. That helps us as we learn. We can influence processes that are occurring outside of what maybe might be a traditional AI stream for future use. So those are really the kind of two that we focused on. One that caught us by surprise was probably the volume. So as you bring in more data and you start to teach the bots more and more, that volume, really starts to grow quickly. And so both the hardware needs, the speed at which the hardware needs to process, as well as the licensing costs, depending on the various, if you build and then you license some of the ML, or you buy an all-in-one package, you have to be cognizant of right-sizing your contract, kind of up front for future volume, not necessarily 30, 60-day volume.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense, and that gets a little bit into the infrastructure question then too. But it's interesting to me to hear that governance is one of the first pillars you focused on too, and how you've created almost a center of excellence for AI, which is what we're seeing across the board as well in more mature companies, as they realize that AI has the ability to impact a lot of different lines of business and business functions, and that it really requires the involvement of multiple different types of employees, but also data sources, which gets back to your first point that, you got to have great data and know where your data lives in order to have good AI. Eugene, let's kick it over to you. What do you think, in your experience, that it takes internally to prepare for AI?
Yeah, so Rob mentioned the legacy systems, and we have quite a few legacy systems. And so getting everything to talk to each other is challenging because everything was built at a different time. At that point, we were using that system. At that point, we were using another system. We had this many people versus that many people. So I think housing the data is really, really important. And making sure you collect everything and everything can talk to each other is probably one of the most important things for us, I think, or at least I think that most organizations should consider, because, based on user behavior, that information should be stored and utilized throughout the process of a user interacting with your company. That all of that information has to be housed, and it all needs to communicate properly. And that, to me, is really important to get, to get everybody on the same page in the organization, because we have so many people. I think it's really important to make sure that all the stakeholders that could potentially be impacted by this are in the room and understand what this is, how will it even impact them. And it's awesome that, that Rob is saying that they have essentially a center of excellence where they basically have everyone involved to monitor this thing is amazing. I think that's probably the best route to move ahead with AI, to make sure that everyone is aware of how this thing is progressing. And the technology and all that stuff is really, those are strong points to make sure that you can scale because the amount of data that we continuously collect is building. It costs money to store that data and to make sure that that data can move fast enough through the pipelines. So those are all really valid points, and I think those are really, really important. The infrastructure, making sure that all the stakeholders are involved, and that there's some kind of logic built in for the scaling of all the information. Because if you can't scale, and let's say you pick a certain infrastructure system that's perfect for the solution for now, for the next year or two, and then a year or two later, you find out that that infrastructure is no longer going to be viable for the amount of content or for the amount of information that you're actually going to gather, you're going to be in a huge situation of how do I now move to a new system and spend crazy amounts of money. So you need to be able to get into a technology that's easily scalable and is not going to hinder you, your performance in any way.
Scalability, that's a really good point there, Eugene, because a lot of times people start with these, one-off proofs of concept or experimentation in AI that only affects one data set or line of business. They don't really think about how this needs to scale to the larger organization to involve multiple data sets. So I think that's a great point that you touch on there, as well as you talk about involving the right stakeholders, and that's where we get into employee education around AI, is that you can't just assume that everyone's going to want to use AI or knows how to use it or how it's impacting their goals and their metrics that they're measured against, as well as how it impacts customer experience. So education is definitely part of the people pillar that we've identified too.
And I think it helps to have.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. So I think it helps to have a third party come in and kind of at least give you an understanding of how much scale do you really anticipate having with the amount of data inputs you're going to have. Because if you don't really understand how the data inputs are going to drastically grow, you're not really going to understand how much scale you really need. So you have to kind of sit down and understand all the inputs that are coming in and how those inputs will grow drastically over time to make sure that you can plan for scale.
Mm-hmm. And what sort of stakeholders would you recommend be at the table for that discussion?
I mean, honestly, anyone that's going to be handling any information with the customer. I mean, it depends on the situation, I guess. But, I mean, really anyone that's customer-facing, at least on our end. But again, it depends on how you're executing AI. Like, what is it for? Is it for customer-facing, or is it for HR-focused information, or is it what's it for? Those would be the stakeholders that can at least give you information as to how much data they typically go through. I'm sure that most organizations track calls, and you could potentially create themes of information that are being asked, and out of that, be able to extrapolate how much potentially answers you can have and stuff like that. So like customer service is great, and all these different inputs can happen.
So it depends on the use case who should be in the room. That makes a lot of sense. I think that's great. And now this brings us to our last question here. Last question that I have for both of you, and then we'll turn it to the audience for a little bit of Q&A. And so what I'd like to know is a little bit about advice, what you've learned along the way here that you think would be wildly helpful to all of the attendees there that are considering utilizing AI to effectively reach their customers or to impact, internal functions. So Eugene, I'm going to ask you to just maybe elaborate a little bit on what you said in your last answer. You gave some great points of advice around, legacy systems as well as education and involving the right stakeholders. Is there any other pieces of advice that you could impart upon our audience?
I think making sure that we don't internally speak to technology in a complicated way. I think almost dumbing things down is not a bad thing. I think that if we get into, internally using acronyms for this and that, it just builds barriers for people to understand. And I think if everyone understands how the technology will work or should work, I think it'll help easily the entire organization move quicker and spread faster.
You're right. The field of AI is filled with acronyms. That's one of my biggest pet peeves.
There's no reason for it. We have acronyms left and right in our organization, and it's constantly people come up to me like, hey, do you know about this acronym? And I'm like, well, in reference to my department, I understand it, but in reference to your department, I may not. And if you're building something that's going to touch points across the entire organization, you need to make sure that you're not putting in phrases and terminology, language that's going to essentially potentially silo this technology and to a point where people are not going to understand it. They're going to be abrasive towards it because they don't understand it. And so you have to be very careful with that.
Don't use it to ostracize people. I think that's a great point. It's interesting in our research, we come across similar findings that it's almost important to evangelize the limitations of AI in a lot of cases in order to get people on board with it, to understand that, hey, to quell some of those fears about, job displacement from AI and automation too. That's a great piece of advice. Rob, what advice do you have?
I think the best advice I'd give is similar to a comment I made a bit back, is patience is a virtue. It really does take time, and I think that setting the vision, maybe slowing the excitement a little bit in the beginning to build the right foundation will really yield the most benefits, because people that are maybe not as technical may get disenchanted with some of the upfront heavy lifting that needs to occur. if you can kind of unveil the curtain, if you will, after a lot of that heavy lifting has been done, their excitement level, I think, will show through. And so I think just this takes time. This is not an overnight success. And if any companies, I mean, I can't tell you the amount of emails that I get, cold calls from the next company that's starting all-in-one AI solution that's going to save me hundreds of millions of dollars. They're selling you snake oil. It's never that easy, and if it was, Google or somebody probably would have bought them already. So it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of focus, but some of the best things take a little bit of time, and so that's where I'd focus.
That is a great piece of advice to end on for folks, Rob. Thank you both so much for your very insightful answers and riveting conversation so far. And now I will turn it back to you, Rachel, to tee up our audience Q&A. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, guys. This has been great so far. And audience, thank you so much for these awesome questions. It's not too late to enter more. Go ahead and just put your question in the question box below the presentation window and click submit. So some of these we've covered a little bit, but I want to also include Jaimy now in these questions. And so the first question is, have the panelists or has Jaimy been surprised by anything once they started learning about and using AI tools? And Jaimy, do you want to start us off? Any surprises when you started putting together these studies?
Yeah, I think one of my biggest surprises that I came across in doing this AI readiness research with my colleague Jessica Grootman is what a big part ethics really do play. I think that it's very important to address up front where your company stands on if and when and how AI is used. And just because you can use AI, does that mean you should? Whether it's, especially when we're looking at customer acquisition and customer retention and even just impacting customer service and experience. And it's really important, and it goes a long way to see that large companies, Googles and Facebooks of the world, actually have ethics advisory boards and panels to address some of these really big questions that employees are worried about, that customers are worried about. I know in our conversation earlier, I think it was Eugene who said that he's even wary, even though he's in this space, he's wary of giving his personally identifiable information to a chatbot because you don't know how it's going to be used yet. So I think that we can't ignore this area of ethics when it comes to crafting AI strategies within organizations. That's probably been my biggest point of surprise that it comes up in almost every call.
That is really interesting. So, and Rob, you had mentioned a couple of surprises. We were talking about when we had our discussion earlier this month. You talked a little bit about the customers you already had, and then how sometimes AI was allowing you to reach or people that were already there, and how you could connect with them better. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the side effects that we didn't necessarily build into initially was starting to pick up on specific data points that would suggest that there's a whole new segment of users that we really weren't paying that much attention to. They just happened to be coming to us without us really understanding or paying much mind to it. And so, leveraging, the power of some of this machine learning, we were able to identify a whole new subset of customers that we could then create lookalike models against and really, target in terms of attracting them to our site, to our experience, to our brand. And so that was a little bit of a surprising good guy to have, as it wasn't a use case that we were necessarily building into. It just happened that one of our PhDs who was surfing through some of the algorithms started to pick up on some of those trends and rewrote some of them, and we were able to create some incremental discoverability, which was exciting for us.
That does sound interesting. And Eugene, do you have any sense or anything that surprised you as as Sears Parts Direct started using some AI tools?
I kind of brought up the idea with the terminology and stuff that a lot of people had a misconception of what they assumed it was AI, and so there was a lot of education that has to be kind of done to make sure everyone's on the same page, because sometimes you mention the word AI and all of a sudden they think of Transformer, right? And so you're kind of like, well, let me explain what is feasible, what's not feasible, and we kind of had that back and forth so that everyone was on the same page and so that everybody understood what really was feasible in this technology.
Exactly. And so I am going to move on to the next question. And you all have covered this a little bit, but one of the things that the audience seems to be interested in is, what kinds of customer interactions should be handled by a chatbot and what should be handled by a human? And Rob, I'll start with you in this one.
The answer is I have no clue, and I mean that in the best of ways, because I think you need to go in with an open mind. We started with 10 use cases that we thought were the things that we could most easily create. We're now up to 52, and I've been very surprised at as we enhance the conversation and we teach the bot more and more, customers are willing to give it a shot. So for us, we actually, the way that we look at it is, for us, there's a couple of key KPIs that we need to look at. One is exposure rate. How often can I get the bot in front of a customer? And so we're very upfront about the fact that, hey, how are you? How can we help you? The customer asks the question. We let them know that they could speak with our automated bot to help them get through. And we're surprised to see how many people do choose that path. Now, there are certainly a good portion of people decide against that. But for those that do, then our next important KPI is really around containment rate. How many people that start talking with our machine, with our bot, finish and don't have to be handed off to a human. And that gives us kind of our core deflection rate. And so when we look at each one of those use cases, we look at those three KPIs to understand where we can get better, where we can do more. And what we've found is that where we expose against certain questions and we have very high containment rate, we want to push that even further and do that even more. And what we found is, customers sometimes have very easy questions that they just maybe can't find on the site, or they don't want to take the time to call. And so those are the easier ones that we try to get more exposure to. Others that are very actionable, we find are easy too. Something like, what's my balance, or when is my payment due date, things like that. When we get into some more of the complex transactional operations, that's when we tend to hand off to a human, and are still continuing to work hard to enhance the bot's prospects in those areas.
That's great, and we're wrapping up here at the end. But Eugene, do you have a minute to talk about that right synergy between human and chatbot, or if you all found that right balance?
Well, I could just bring up that Lyft example that I gave earlier. So the interesting thing was that I was open to talking to a chatbot when I had a problem, but my biggest problem was that the chatbot could not understand exactly my issue. And that's where things kind of fell apart completely. And that's where I was like, well, I don't like chatbots now, because this chatbot hasn't officially understood what the heck I'm even talking about. So there has to be the right balance, and organizations, I mean, what Rob is saying is perfect, is the fact that, they're finding cases where they're trying to figure out how to keep you in the chatbot and answer your question without having to force you to answer, actually call someone and talk and explain your situation all over again. So I think
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but guys, this has been such a great conversation, but we do need to wrap up here. Guests and panelists and attendees, thank you so much for attending today's webcast, How AI is Transforming Retail Customer Acquisition Strategies, brought to you by Drift. And particular thanks to our panelists, Rob Roy, Chief Digital Officer with Sprint, Eugene Fagan, SEO Manager with Sears Parts Direct, and of course, Jaimy Szymanski, Industry Analyst and Founding Partner with Kaleido Insights. Reminder that you will also be able to listen to the recording of this webinar within about 30 minutes using the same link. If you enjoyed today's webcast or have suggestions for how we can make it better, we'd love for you to give us a rating. I'm Rachel Brownell, signing off for VentureBeat. This webcast is copyright 2018 by VentureBeat and Drift. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by VentureBeat and Drift, who are solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Thanks for your time and have a great day.